On this special big interview edition of Green Signals, I talked to Nick Crossfield, Managing Director of Alstom's UK and Ireland business. We discussed the background to the desperate situation at their Derby train building factory, where closure through lack of orders is a real possibility. It would have devastating consequences for the men and women who work there and on the UK's credibility in global rail vehicle manufacturing. We discussed how in December last year, Secretary of State Mark Harper committed that a package which included around 90 additional carriages that could be used to provide much-needed extra capacity on London's booming Elizabeth line would be signed, sealed and delivered by the end of January 2024. But that deadline came and went. I also hear how if the UK government makes the decision to order those extra carriages, Alstom will invest yet more in Derby, with the result that Derby becomes the centre of excellence for Alstom's new electric commuter train worldwide, an export story to be proud of. This is a story of government and civil service bureaucracy, procrastination, and world-class dithering. At stake, around 15,000 jobs in the factory as well as the local and regional supply chain. Nick explains how it's still possible to save the factory. But for Derby, it's 1 minute to midnight. Nick, welcome to Green Signals. Thank you so much for your time at what I know is a really busy and challenging time for you. We're talking specifically about Derby. It's been in the press a great deal, of course, of late. Up until recently, it was delivering one of the largest train building contracts that we've probably ever seen in terms of the Aventra. At some point, though, that was always going to come to an end, and you had to think about plans for the future. At what point did you go, right, okay, this is coming to an end. We really have now got to have a plan for the future?
Goes back to about 12 months, Richard. So March, April last year, as you rightly say, we were coming to the end of 2,500 cars on the Aventra programme. So one of the largest contracts I think ever undertaken in the UK. April, May, we started to look forward, thinking manufacturing is due to conclude around February, March of this year. We would need to start assessing options for that site, given its size and criticality to the group.
In terms of assessing those plans, presumably it starts with saying, well, what's the pipeline of future orders? And at the moment, the Department of Transport are responsible for determining what and when those orders come out. So presumably, first conversation was with the Department of Transport.
We engaged with the DfT, and we engaged specifically with Secretary of State Mark Harper to answer precisely that question in terms of what is the future pipeline profile for the UK market, and also to make him aware of the specifics around the timing of any opportunities that would come to the UK market.
So what was the critical date for you then? Because presumably you said, look, we've got to know something by this day, or we're going to have a problem.
We needed certainty on when the UK pipeline for rolling stock orders was likely to materialise. Specifically, there are some big opportunities out there. If you look at the UK market, particularly for commuter rail, by 2030, it is projected to be the second largest market in Europe, behind Germany. We knew that the market in the medium to long term is attractive, but our concern was in the short term. How do we manage that capability? How do we maintain that capacity through that short term period to ensure that we are there to bid and deliver into that sort of very, very attractive market in the medium to longer term?
Give us an idea of that gap then. Presumably, what did you say to Mark Harper? Presumably he said, look, we know there's some new orders coming in the future, but Aventra, the current build, is coming to an end. What kind of gap are we talking about between those?
The gap that we were looking at was between 18 and 24 months, so 1.5 to 2 years. We said we would need to understand what we could do to support that site over that 18-month period. And we wanted to specifically talk to him about some ideas that we had that we thought were practical, reasonable options that we could implement that would get us through that period.
Which were what? I mean, give us an idea of this. So what were the practical?
Very important to point out. We didn't approach the government for any direct financial support. We weren't seeking any financial investment. We weren't seeking any government loan support. We were talking about practical options. So some of the existing Aventra contracts had the ability to order additional optional units under the terms of those contracts. We also understood with one of the contracts, TfL Elizabeth Line cars, there is a need for additional vehicles in the medium term on the Elizabeth Line. I mean, people look at the passenger growth on that line since its opening, together with the decisions that have been taken around having Old Oak Common as the terminus for HS2. There is a need for additional capacity.
Right.
So we approached the government with some very specific practical opportunities that we believed were easy to implement, would not give any cause for contention or risk. And we thought that the DfT could support readily.
And did they? What was the reaction to that?
They firstly welcomed the thinking. They welcomed the sort of practical ideas that we brought to the table. And we did discuss through the summer, specifically around a set of ideas, as I've said, extending some of the existing Aventra contracts, Elizabeth Line and South West Rail in particular. We also discussed with DfT the opportunity for bringing refurbishment projects into the Derby site. The Derby site, given its skills and capabilities, lends itself to heavy, sort of moderately sized refurbishment projects. And there are some projects that were out in the market at that time. And we talked to the DfT about looking at the scale and scope of those refurbishment opportunities and bringing those into the Derby site. It's work that needs doing,
sure,
either now or in the longer term. And our argument to the DfT was, why don't we do that work now? We can secure the pricing now, we can secure the resourcing now for it, and we're saving ourselves the pain of doing that work later on, probably at a higher price.
Yeah. My understanding from the discussions that we've had was that there was also some potential for some international work as well.
We discuss very specifically bringing some international mandates from the wider Alstom group into the UK and specifically into the Derby site as part of that support exercise. The DfT naturally were curious and asked us, what could we as Alstom bring to that site to support that site through that period. Specifically, we talked about a mandate that we are delivering into Ireland. So we have a 10-year framework contract with Irish Rail for the delivery also of a commuter product, a hybrid commuter product. We bid that, interestingly, before the acquisition, and it was bid out of a Polish build location.
Oh, this was before you acquired.
Before we acquired,
right.
yeah. And the original assumption in that bid is that would be produced out of our Polish facility. We specifically talked to DfT about relocating that mandate from Poland into the UK. However, in doing that, it was very, very important that we had that domestic base load, the Aventra base load that we'd asked for, because the economics of bringing that mandate out of Poland into Derby wouldn't work without some element of domestic base load as well.
Makes perfect sense. So what sort of contract size are we talking about here with the Irish Rail contract?
So the Irish Rail contract is a long-term framework. It's a 10-year framework, so it provides longevity, and it's anywhere up to 500 to 600 cars.
Wow.
So it's a sizable mandate. And the interesting point about the Irish mandate as well is the technology. It is a hybrid product. So we are building for Ireland a battery electric hybrid vehicle, and it would have been the first of such a decarbonised offering offered by our business in the UK and Ireland.
But presumably that was a committed contract. So there was a point at which, if it was going to be moved from Poland to the UK to Derby, there was a deadline, was there?
So in the summer of last year, we were at the point where we were just about to enter into production of the first cars for the Irish Rail mandate. There was still the opportunity at that stage to relocate that production process from Poland to the UK. That deadline was September. because as of October, November, we were into producing the first cars for Irish Rail. And at that point, it is prohibitively difficult to move a mandate that's in mid-production. So we made the DfT aware that, look, if we are going to look at that, which is a major move for Alstom, we would have to have taken that decision by September latest to do it in a sensible fashion.
And given that we're sat here in April 2024, I'm presuming that that deadline came and went.
It didn't happen. So we didn't manage to get agreement with DfT on the UK domestic portion of the package. So reluctantly, we had to sort of leave the Irish Rail mandate in Poland, where it is now entering into production. It's now in production as we speak.
So that's pretty bad news. So now we're in sort of September, October. You're still trying to get a commitment at least to a domestic solution. What happened next?
Well, we're into September, October. Very critical because we'd continue to work our way through the Aventra program.
Yeah.
It was now very, very clear in September, October that the Aventra manufacturing program was finishing in February of the current year. So we had a very, very hard stop in front of us to manufacturing operations. You've got a site there that's employing 3,000 people producing those vehicles in Derby.
Yeah.
Additionally, we've got around 12 to 13,000 in the local supply chain supporting that build process. So in September, October, we reluctantly had to commence consultation because we had no commitment at that stage. So at that point in time, manufacturing was ending in February. So we had to start preparing the site, the employees and the supply chain for that stop. So we commenced in October consultation process with all of our employees and supply chain colleagues on site. Very difficult moments. We informed all of the site personnel where we were at that particular point in time. The message was we are still in conversations with government, but as of that point in time, we have no firm commitment. That may well change, but at that point in time, we have no commitment. Therefore, we were legally obliged to start the consultation process, which is what we did.
So what was the department's reaction to that? Because that's kind of moved us into sort of the next level of a more difficult reality. I mean, did that stir some reaction?
It stirred the process to some extent. I think it galvanized people into probably understanding the seriousness of the position in the short term. I think at that point in time, the realization began to become apparent that, February is not that far away and we have a very, very hard stop. We then entered into a very intensive period of conversations with a number of government departments because by this stage it morphed into a cross-departmental initiative within government. So we were talking to not just DfT at that point, we're talking to Treasury and also UK government investment people as well. And at that point, we went into very intensive conversations around, what if they were to support the site, what would that site look like in the medium to long term? You must understand that Derby is a very, very large operation. It probably needs considerable right sizing in order to make it fit for purpose for the future market. So we entered into a process of conversation with the government around what would that restructuring exercise look like. And it was very, very clear that the government at that point was still intent on supporting the site in whatever way they could. But in return, they needed to understand that as part of whatever support was put in, be it sort of volume, Aventra volume, if we could get there, that in return, the company would make that site fit for purpose. So we worked very, very hard with the government through October, November, articulating what that restructuring would look like in Derby and what the future for that site would be. Very, very simply, the site today is 6 manufacturing lines, annual capacity of 700 cars, too large for the UK market in the medium to long term. The concept that we put on the table was actually a Derby that was between 3 and 4 manufacturing lines, down from the current 6, an annual capability of around 400 cars per annum. So, and as part of that investment, modernisation of the site,
Right.
and also modernising that site to be able to support the next generation of traction technology, batteries, hydrogen, the full gamut of decarbonisation traction that's available.
So to summarise at this point, you said you're prepared to commit significant investment into the plant. You know there's some big orders coming. You're happy to wait as long as you know that they're going to come to market soon. You're not seeking any preferential position in terms of those. But what you do need is some commitment to something happening that's going to enable you to fill in that gap. And we're not talking very much either. And my understanding is that as we come towards the end of the year, you've actually got reason to be confident that you are actually going to get a commitment.
Yeah, there was a sense as we went through October, November, there was a sense that commitment would come. I think the government liked what we were saying with regard to the future of the Derby site. I think in that moment they recognised that the company was putting significant investment into maintaining a manufacturing capability in the UK. So yes, discussions progressed. We then came to a point where the government had a target to try and get all the commitments finalised by the end of January. And that's the sort of deadline that we were working to. As we went through December, there was considerable media interest, considerable stakeholder interest. I myself was presenting to the Transport Select Committee at that point in terms of what we were doing at Derby. There was considerable political interest in how things were evolving on all sides of the House. But then we got to a point where I think people felt that there was a trajectory to getting us to the end of January. So we all agreed, and at that point, Secretary of State was happy to instruct his teams to getting to a point that by the end of January, we would have not only the short-term commitments finalised, sealed, signed, done, we would also have Southeastern, that next big commuter opportunity in the UK, in the market.
At least in the market.
At least
Right.
in the market, so that there was visibility that the market was coming back, and medium to long term, UK was starting to take off again as far as rolling stock was concerned.
This is great. So you went home for Christmas, you sat down for your Christmas dinner and you thought, good. I've got a commitment from the Secretary of State for Transport, from Mark Harper, that we're all going to work incredibly hard during January, and by the end of January, we're going to have a commitment to be able to move forward. What happened?
As you say, positive process at that point in time. Also, all the trades union stakeholders were aware of that deadline and were hugely supportive. They were galvanising to supporting us get to the end of January. We went through January, very difficult. We got to the end of January. It was becoming increasingly clear as we got to the end of January that we weren't going to get that commitment at that point in time. It was very, very difficult at the end of January because you must understand we had paused the consultation and the demobilisation,
Which they'd asked you to do,
which they'd asked us to do as part of the effort, which we agreed to do on the understanding that we would get to the end of January with some visibility and commitment. You can see that by the time we got to the end of January, we were literally in a position where we had between 4 and 6 weeks of production left. So in 6 weeks, we were stopping the factory, but we had not, managed to continue the consultation process. End of January, no commitment. So again, we made our point very, very clear to government that we had to reopen consultation. We now had to begin to consult employees on the fact that production was ending in 6 weeks' time and we had no work for them. At the same time, Richard, the external supply chain started to implode somewhat. So we saw the first administrations of key supply chain partners. Now, at that point, through January and into the early part of February, despite the fact that we still had no commitment, we fundamentally believed that we would get there based on the conversations that we were having. as a gesture of support, we agreed to insource some of those key supply chain capabilities that we were losing. So we had specific suppliers that had gone into administration, but because we knew we would need those capabilities if we got these infill orders, we actually employed those people. We recruited those people into our business, parked them in our business for a period of time in anticipation that we would be using these people on those mandates. That hasn't happened. So we sit here as we went through February into March, still no commitment. We've seen continued demobilization in the supply chain. You'll have seen in the media recently some reasonably high profile administrations of long-standing firms in the sector. That trend is now accelerating. And we ourselves, as we sit here today, are in the process of continuing that consultation process, and we are releasing people from the business pretty much on a weekly basis now.
So sat here approaching the middle of April, have we passed the point of no return, or is there still a possibility that if the government went, okay, I know we were going to try and do September last year, I know we were going to try and do January this year, but if they now went, right, we're going to do this, what's the kind of minimum that's required and by when?
As we sit here today, we are not unequivocally beyond the point of no return. We are in a very, very difficult position. It is fair to say that even if we were able to get a commitment right now, we would not be able to remobilize some of the supply chain that's already gone. So there are some difficulties already in the supply chain if we were suddenly to get a commitment now. The only thing, sitting here now, and, you must understand we've had now 11 months of, and don't get me wrong, they've been professional, courteous, business-like conversations. There's been no personal animosity. Yeah, they've been frustrating conversations, have no doubt about that, but there's been no personal animosity. They are fundamentally decent people. We just haven't got a decision. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we're a global business. We've got plants all over the world. And you can see from a group perspective, our group is just looking at this from a purely portfolio perspective, thinking, well, okay, if there's no commitment in the UK, then, we'll put the investment in somewhere else. Sitting here today, we would need a very, very quick commitment for a minimum of 10 Aventra trains, be it 10 Elizabeth line trains or 10 car unit trains. We have put forward in all of our discussions that in order to support that site over that 18-month period, the minimum manufacturing threshold is around 100 to 120 cars, 120 carriages. If we had that core minimum baseload, together with what we can bring from other parts of the Alstom business to bolt around that core baseload, we can support that site for 18 months, 2 years.
And you mentioned Elizabeth line train, 10 trains, so that's 9 cars each, so 90 vehicles. I mean, these are trains that everybody knows they want and we need. So this is not a speculative order. This is stuff that we need to get.
No, this capacity is needed on the network medium to longer term.
Yeah.
If you're not buying it now, you're going to be buying it in 5-6 years' time.
Yeah.
At a very different price point.
Quite.
And trying to match a product in 5 years' time with a product that we've delivered now.
Is there an even rosier future for Derby, possibly? Let's presume that the plant is saved. We know there's some big orders coming. You've mentioned, by 2030, huge market. But that's just for UK orders. Is there a wider role that Derby could play in the Alstom group potentially?
It does, and we do that today. We've just finished the export of the Cairo monorail. Fantastic product, delivered on time, on budget. Cairo loves it. And in fact, Derby today is the global centre of excellence for monorail product. So all of our group monorail design capability sits in Derby. Specifically, we've talked to the government about increasing Derby's export capacity. And there's a very important decision that the group has to make about its next generation of commuter product. Aventra, the current commuter product, although they're new trains and we're just delivering them, it's a 10-year-old product.
Yeah, sure.
It was conceived from a design engineering perspective 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The future bids in the UK and internationally will be bid from a different an evolution of the Aventra platform, but the next generation platform, the Odessia platform. We have been talking to government for some months now about the potential of bringing the Odessia platform to Derby, to UK. And that would mean Derby becoming the home of the Odessia platform. So not just delivering Odessia product into the UK, but hosting the Odessia platform from Derby. And that would mean globally. So basically, the design, the engineering, the development capability for Odessia sits in Derby. The bidding capability for Odessia sits in Derby. And that platform capability that sits in Derby supports the Odessia ambitions around the world. Now, Odessia is an important platform for us because, again, I repeat, if you look at the UK commuter market in 2030, second biggest market in Europe. So Odessia is the platform, is the product that we would bid into the UK market. It's also the platform that we would bid into the European market and beyond. It's a great opportunity for Derby to have a long-term platform investment that secures jobs not just that are contingent upon the domestic demand, but also contingent upon the global demand for that product.
So without sounding over dramatic then, riding on the back of a decision to either go or not go with 10 Elizabeth line trains that everybody knows we need, Derby will either close or it could become or will become the location in the Alstom group from which you will conceive and deliver globally your new commuter rail train.
Yeah, and
wow,
it's important because when a site, and not every site hosts a platform,
right?
When you become a global centre of excellence and you host a platform, you're responsible for the development of that platform in the long term. And when you think about what that means, it's considerable because, you know, you look at the next sort of 5 to 10 years where, you know, we've all got a challenge now to decarbonise our fleet.
Yeah.
So not only have you got the design and the evolution of the Odessia platform as a train in itself, you've also got the potential of, well, how do we decarbonise that platform? You know, what kind of traction technologies do we develop for that platform going forwards? So, you know, platform investments lead to a series of spin-off micro industries around the plant, which, you know, just adds to the longevity of the facility.
Totally. Okay, that's a really positive point. Let's just look at the negative for a moment. You know, if Derby were to close, then what? Because there's going to be orders from the UK. Alstom's going to want to bid for those orders. What does it mean for how you will do that? And what does it mean for the UK's position in terms of European train manufacturing?
So, a couple of points. Alstom will always remain committed to the UK market. As I said, it's a large market. Yeah. You know, we have significant revenue outside of pure rolling stock manufacturing in the UK. We have a big service business. We have a big signalling business. We'll always remain committed to the market. We will always participate in the UK rolling stock market, even if we didn't have a manufacturing facility in the UK. It just means that we'll be bidding product out of Polish site, South African site, Indian site, And we will bring fantastic product to the UK market. It's just that that product will be produced somewhere else. The second point is we do need to think carefully about what kind of rolling stock supply chain we want in the UK going forwards, because if we lost Derby totally and completely, we would be the only G7 economy without a fully soup to nuts rolling stock manufacturing capability. And what I mean by that is Derby, we have several rolling stock facilities in the UK, and they're all very good facilities. My competitors have excellent facilities. Derby is slightly unique in the UK context. It's 150 years old. And as a consequence of that longevity in the investment, the legacy investment, it is the only site in the UK that has design, development, engineering, manufacturing, test and delivery capability. So you have the ability in Derby to go from paper to finished train completely. If we lose that capability, as I said, we are the only G7 economy without the ability to do that. So we will be importing that capability for the future.
Well, look, that's a world I really would rather not contemplate. But either way, look, it's been a fantastic discussion, Nick. What's clear, there's been a huge amount of conversation, a huge amount of discussion. The problem is there's been no definitive decisions from government. But the positive thing I'm taking from all of this, I'm sure other people will do, that if we can get a decision from the government on what amounts to 10 Aventra trains that everybody knows we need anyway, that would give you the confidence, that would give you the UK domestic stopgap that would allow you to then invest in the plant, move some of the refurbishment work there, look at stuff for the group, but also becomes the host centre for the Odessia product, your new commuter rail platform, and Derby would be in charge of that worldwide, right? So there's an awful lot riding on the decision for Mark Harper in the next couple of weeks. So look, thanks so much for your time, Nick. We appreciate you spending it. We appreciate all that you're doing, and all the best. Good luck.
Thank you, Richard.